Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Monday, January 13th. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that Donald Trump is trying to keep Canada off balance, with talk of Canada becoming the 51st state as a distraction from the U.S. tariffs threat. He also told MSNBC that Canada is prepared to retaliate with tariffs of our own.
As we did last time, we are ready to respond with tariffs as necessary. You may remember when Donald Trump put tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, which did nothing but raise the cost of steel and aluminum for American consumers. We responded by putting tariffs on things like bourbon, Harley Davidsons, orange juice playing cards, these sorts of things that Canadians could find replacements for, so they wouldn't have to pay more for that money. And it ended up causing a lot of loss in American businesses for whom Canada is their #1 export partner. We are the #1 export partner of about 35 different U.S. states, and anything that thickens the border between us ends up costing American citizens and American jobs. That's not what President Trump got elected to do. I know he got elected to try and make life easier for all Americans, to support American workers.
Mr. Trudeau says that Canadians need to take Mr. Trump's expansionist rhetoric seriously, and that there is a certain amount of flattery in Mr. Trump seeing how great the country is. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says she met with incoming U.S. President Donald Trump over the weekend. She posted on social media about meeting with Mr. Trump and key allies in the incoming administration at Mar-a-Lago. Ms. Smith says that she will continue to engage in constructive dialogue and diplomacy and do all she can to further Alberta's and Canada's interests. But NDP leader Jagmeet Singh said this morning that meetings with Donald Trump aren't going to accomplish anything.
And that's why what we've seen again and again has not worked. Going to meet with them, trying to wine and dine them, is a failed approach. Donald Trump is not rational. You can't discuss a plan over a meal with him. He is a bully. And bullies understand one thing, that is strength. They also understand pain. So if he wants to pick a fight with Canada, we have to make sure it's clear that it's going to hurt Americans as well. There's going to be pain felt for not just Canadians, but also Americans. And so that's why I'm calling on my plan. We know that the United States needs our critical minerals. They're very important for the United States. So I'm calling on all political leaders to support turning off the taps on those critical minerals. Let's stop the flow of those critical minerals into the States. There's no quicker way to get Donald Trump to back away from tariffs than to shut off the tap on critical minerals, what the states need very clearly.
Labour Minister Stephen McKinnon says he isn't joining the race to become the next leader of the Liberal Party. Mr. McKinnon says that he feels there isn't enough time to put a good campaign forward, but adds that the leadership needs diverse, experienced, and have pragmatic voices in both English and French. He says that he will focus on his own responsibilities instead and will listen closely to help make an informed choice around who should replace Justin Trudeau. Montreal MP Frank Baylis and MP Chandra Arya have joined the race, and Federal Transport and Internal Trade Minister Anita Anand announced on Saturday that she won't be running, joining Melanie Joly and Dominic LeBlanc. Any federal party leadership race is bound to have some drama and controversy. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is considering a running, but is already backtracking on a claim that she's never been a Conservative Party member. The Tories quickly responded by providing a screen grab of their electronic records, showing Ms. Clark was an active member from June 2nd, 2022 until June 30th, 2023. Late Friday, Ms. Clark took to social media, posting a facepalm emoji and admitting that she had misspoken. U.S. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance says those who committed violence during the riot at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, obviously shouldn't be pardoned.
President Trump says there's a process. Where is the line drawn on who will and wouldn't be considered for a pardon?
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law. And there are a lot of people, we think, in the wake of January the 6th who were prosecuted unfairly. We need to rectify that.
Mr. Vance's comments come as incoming President Donald Trump is promising to use his clemency power on behalf of many of those who tried to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election 4 years ago. All right, stay tuned. Up next, Saudi Arabia presses EU diplomats to lift sanctions against Syria. And investigators in California are trying to figure out what sparked that wildfire. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Saudi Arabia is pressing top EU diplomats to lift sanctions against Syria in the aftermath of the overthrow of President Bashar al-Assad. European and Middle Eastern diplomats met in the Saudi capital on Sunday to discuss Syria's future, where the host country urged the lifting of sanctions to boost the economy and rebuilding in Syria. European countries and the U.S. have said that the ending of sanctions depends on the progress of the political transition. And Canada is set to send humanitarian assistance to the border region of Turkey and Syria after the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. International Development Minister Ahmed Hussein and MP Omar Al-Gabra are the first Canadian delegation to visit the region. Mr. Hussein announced just over $17 million in funding for humanitarian assistance, including clean water and food, protection services, sanitation, and health services. Thousands of Israelis demonstrated in the streets of Tel Aviv on Saturday, calling for a ceasefire with Hamas and the return of the Gaza hostages. The turmoil comes as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sends the director of the Mossad Foreign Intelligence Agency to negotiations in Qatar. Observers say that the move is a sign of progress in the talks of the war in Gaza. Just one brief ceasefire has been achieved in the 15 months of war, and that was in the early weeks of fighting. Officials say that the U.S. and Arab mediators made significant progress overnight toward brokering a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war and the release of scores of hostages held in the Gaza Strip, but a deal has not yet been reached. 3 officials said on Monday that the coming days would be critical for ending more than 15 months of fighting that has destabilized the Middle East. On several occasions over the past year, U.S. officials have said that they were on the verge of reaching a deal, only to have talks stall. Investigators in California say they're trying to come up with an array of possible ignition sources in their search for the cause behind the huge fires that have killed at least 24 people in Los Angeles. The community of Pacific Palisades is gone, and officials have placed the origin of the wind whip blaze behind a home on Piedra Morada Drive. Lightning is the most common source of fires in the U.S., but investigators ruled that out quickly as there were no reports of strikes in the area or near the second major blaze. Emergency Preparedness Minister Harjit Sajjan says that firefighters from Alberta and British Columbia are heading to California to help battle massive wildfires. Mr. Sajjan said in a social media post that 60 firefighters from the 2 provinces will be deployed as soon as Monday. He said in the post that, quote, "Our American friends have asked for help to fight the wildfires in California, and Team Canada is responding." And he continued with, quote, "Neighbors helping neighbors." BC's forest minister has said that a crew from the province's wildfire service is already bound for California to help the crews. Nearly 60 poultry facilities in British Columbia have reported outbreaks of the avian flu. While the 59 cases are an improvement over the 64 earlier last week, officials say more cases are still being detected every few days. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says that 2 more commercial operations in Abbotsford are the latest to detect the illness in their flocks. Nearly 8.6 million birds have been culled in the province since a spike of infections in the spring of 2022. The Ottawa Food Bank says the amount of food it provides to programs within the network will be reduced due to increasing costs and growing demand. The food bank's CEO, Rachel Wilson, says 98 programs will receive between 20 and 50% less food than they have in past years because of rising costs. The organization says it's unable to purchase the same amount of food as before. She estimates that 40% of food banks in her organization's network reported turning people away on a weekly basis due to capacity last year. Half of Canadians are said to be $200 or less away from being unable to cover their monthly bills and debt payments. The firm MNP has released its quarterly consumer debt report, which found fewer Canadians expect their debt situation to improve in the coming year. A growing number even believe it will worsen. More than half say they don't know if they'll be able to cover all of their living and family expenses over the next year without building up more debt. Blue Origin has called off the debut launch of its massive new rocket because of technical trouble. The 320-foot rocket was supposed to blast off before dawn Monday with a prototype satellite from Florida. But launch controllers had to deal with an unspecified rocket issue in the final minutes of the countdown and ran out of time. Founded by Amazon's Jeff Bezos, Blue Origin did not immediately set a new launch date. All right, stay with us. Coming up, we'll have our weekly Caldwell segment where we'll be discussing the economic impact of Justin Trudeau's resignation. After that, for the third time in 4 years, Canada brought home the gold at the U18 Women's World Championship. We'll have those stories and more news from around the world right after the break. Stay with us. Justin Trudeau's resignation as Liberal Party leader and Prime Minister last week ushered in a new wave of uncertainty for the Canadian economy. With Mr. Trudeau stepping aside and proroguing Parliament ahead of a likely spring or early summer election, numerous economic policies are stuck in limbo. Canada's economic policy uncertainty has surged to the highest in decades, excluding May 2020, the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, and is significantly higher than during the 2007 to 2008 global financial crisis. I'm now joined by Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited, to unpack this further. Brendan, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me, Teresa. There's a lot to unpack, and I want to assure you that my blue glasses are not meant to be as partisan as they may seem. Whatever it appears on TV, my tie and my handkerchief is purple, so it's very neutral between red and blue.
All right. So last week, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stated his intent to resign after a new leader of his Liberal Party is chosen. Now, what impact will this have on Canada's economy as we move into 2025?
Well, it's hard to say. The government shouldn't have too big an impact on the economy, which is the first thing. The fact, if the government is impacting the economy, it's probably not all well. Now, people say he's resigned. We took out an ad in the major papers last week, which people said, "Why are you taking out that ad? He's already resigned." He is not. The ad quotes the person who stood up for Parliament and to Parliament, Oliver Cromwell, who said of a Parliament that had done nothing for so long, I quote, "You have sat too long here for any good you maybe have been doing. Depart, I say, and let us have done with you. In the name of God, go." And he hasn't actually gone, Trudeau. He's still Prime Minister. What he has done is he's put a padlock on Parliament and any sort of parliamentary oversight that the Prime Minister's office might have been subject to. So it's not so much that he has an impact on the economy, but given that the new President of the United States, the once and future President of the United States, is being sworn in, next week, it would be really good to have Canada in stable hands, anybody's hands, but stable hands, rather than this interregnum period, this time in between.
Now, in his announcement, Justin Trudeau stated he's going to prorogue Parliament until March. What are the repercussions of him doing this?
Well, as I think I alluded to earlier, the Parliament does provide oversight. That is supposed to be the ultimate governing body of the land, not in fact the Prime Minister's office. So far from his own resignation, he's actually told everybody else, all the 300 other MPs and however many senators there are, to go home. We don't need you until the end of March, until we get our own stuff sorted out. So in theory, there will be a new Liberal leader. In theory, there will be an election. I think you in your intro you said spring or summer. I bet my MP, he didn't take me up on it, but I was willing to bet my MP lunch that there wouldn't be an election till the autumn, and I was willing to bet him lunch and dinner that there wouldn't be an election until at the very earliest the summer, because I think Trudeau and the Liberal Party probably have one more move left in them.
Now, you mentioned the presidential inauguration, but what effects might Mr. Trudeau's resignation and a new prime minister have on the value of the Canadian dollar or trade agreements, especially with the U.S. as a new president is coming in?
Well, I think for a bunch of reasons, we need a new prime minister. One of them, and not even the top one, is that he clearly does not get along with the new president of the United States. And one of the prime minister's top jobs is to get along with the president of the United States. It doesn't have to be Mulrooney and Reagan singing Irish Eyes Are Smiling, but there does need to be a good working relationship. at least Clinton and Chrétien, or I'd even take Chrétien and Bush too. Just some sort of work, but there is no working relationship between them. So I think that it will be better to have another leader there. But in the meantime, the U.S. has threatened 25% across the board tariffs and even toyed with the idea of annexing Canada. That simply won't happen, certainly not in a Republican presidency, because if they took over the 40 million or so Canadians, they'd probably end up with 30 million Democrats and 10 million Republicans. The math just doesn't work.
Well, Brendan, as always, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, and I'll wear the red glasses for next week.
Thank you. All right, don't go anywhere. Coming up after the break, we'll have more of today's top national and international headlines. The Toronto Star recently published a piece arguing that Canadians become wealthier under Justin Trudeau's time as Prime Minister, and the publication has been under fire ever since. We'll be joined by Adam Zivo from the National Post for more. Stay with us. We'll be right back. The Toronto Star is under fire over a recent business column evaluating the economic record under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The piece argued that Canadians became wealthier under Mr. Trudeau's time as Prime Minister, specifically looking at GDP growth and median net worth. However, other journalists were quick to point out that the piece made fundamental errors, including the National Post's Adam Zivo, who joined us to explain the controversy.
So the piece in the Star, which was penned by the newspaper's business columnist David Olive, argued that Canadians should be thankful for Trudeau because he left the country far wealthier, richer than when he found it. And to substantiate that argument, he cited a few different figures. One of the key ones is that he said that GDP under Trudeau's term has grown by approximately 41%. And in comparison, he said that under Stephen Harper, GDP grew by only 18%. He also said that the median net worth of an economic family in Canada increased by 66%. Now, these figures sound very impressive when taken out of context. However, they're deeply misleading. The GDP figures fail to account for inflation and population growth, whereas the net worth figures fail to account for the impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic. So we have to remember that if you don't adjust your GDP figures for inflation, you're often counting inflation as growth when it is not. So let's say, for example, over the course of Trudeau's term, GDP is often measured in US dollars. The cumulative inflation rate between 2015 and today is approximately 33.1%. So you're essentially arguing that a 33.1% increase in GDP had existed just at that baseline, even though that was just money slowly losing value. So to fix that, Statistics Canada and basically any agency that treats economic analysis with any level of seriousness, looks at real GDP. And so real GDP filters out inflation by adjusting all of the currency numbers to a single year. So in Canada, that's typically done for 2017 Canadian dollars. There's nothing special about 2017. It's just an arbitrary benchmark. And when we look at those figures, at least as they're published by Statistics Canada, we see that under Trudeau, the Canadian economy grew by 21.4%, so far less than what was claimed by the Toronto Star, whereas under Harper, it was 24.4%. So it seems that with this simple adjustment, which makes the data more accurate, we see that Harper was actually a better economic steward than Trudeau. However, the difference between the two prime ministers grows starker when you start to account for the effects of population growth. Over the past few years, we've been predominantly growing our total GDP through mass immigration. We've essentially been masking our sputtering economy by bringing more people in, even though on average people are not making more money, not seeing more net worth, not seeing more income, and just not seeing higher living standards. And when you look at real GDP per capita, you see that under Trudeau, it grew by only 0.8% versus Harper, where it was 4.4%. Now, granted, the numbers that I got from StatsCan only ended at the fourth quarter of 2023, so we don't have the impacts of 2024, but they're not looking good. The problem here is that this op-ed has been widely shared by the Liberal Party, including ministers such as, let's say, Mark Miller. He's the Minister of Immigration. And is concerning because it would suggest that senior party figures have a weak grasp of basic economics. And it's particularly concerning if this is being shared by the immigration minister, because the immigration minister should be able to understand how immigration impacts economics, how it impacts GDP measurements. If he doesn't understand that, that's a problem. So I think we need to, elevate our journalism on economics. We need to focus on giving the facts. We need to focus on providing proper context for numbers and accounting for confounding variables, rather than misrepresenting, nominal GDP numbers that are not adjusted for inflation as a sign of significant growth.
For the third time in 4 years, Canada has brought home gold from the U18 Women's World Championship. Team Canada defeated the United States 3-0 to capture the top honors at the tournament on Sunday. Striker Zablocki locked in the victory when she scored her tournament-leading 8th goal and 12th point on an empty net in the final minute of play. Earlier, Czechia defeated Sweden 2-1 to take home the bronze. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow us on social media. Good night, Canada.